The shadow over the town. In the American town of Riverston, life always moved at a slow and peaceful pace. People knew each other by name, doors were rarely locked, and children could play outside until late at night. But one day, the silence was broken by something strange. Above the old bridge that connected the two banks, a black shadow began to appear every night. It was taller than a man and moved as if alive, though no one was there. Alison, a 17-year-old girl, was the first to notice it. She was returning home from her evening job at a small café and, while crossing the bridge, saw a silhouette slowly glide under the streetlight. When she blinked, the shadow was gone, but the chill running down her skin remained. The next day, she told her friends, Dan and Christine. At first, they laughed, but that night, they decided to go together. At 13 minutes past midnight, as the wind howled over the water, they saw it again. This time, clearly, a tall figure, faceless with outstretched arms. It seemed to be staring directly at them. Dan shouted, trying to scare the shadow away, but the figure did not vanish. Instead, it slowly moved closer, and the three of them, terrified, ran. The next morning, the newspapers reported a missing person. A man returning home late had vanished without a trace, and the last place he had been seen was the same bridge. Alison felt certain it was all connected. From that night on, she began to have dreams. In them, the shadow stretched its hands toward her, and in the distance, she heard someone screaming. She realized this wasn't just her imagination. It was a warning. The shadow over the town. Alison could no longer pretend that everything was normal. The nightmare kept returning each night, leaving her breathless and drenched in cold sweat. Every time she woke up, the clock showed the same time, 12:13 a.m., the exact minute they had seen the shadow on the bridge. She began to investigate. At the town library, she dug through old newspapers, searching for any mention of the bridge. And then she found it, a headline from 1954, yellowed and faded, titled Disappearance at Riverston Bridge, Unsolved Mystery. It described a young woman, Clara Weston, who vanished on a stormy night while crossing the bridge. Witnesses claimed they had seen a dark figure trailing her before she was never seen again. As Alison read, her chest tightened. She flipped through more records and found that every few decades someone vanished near the bridge. The pattern was chilling. Every disappearance happened in the month of October, always around midnight, and always on the bridge. That night, she shared her discovery with Dan and Christine. It's not just a shadow, Alison said, her voice trembling. It's something older, something that's been here long before us. Dan frowned. You're saying this thing has been haunting the bridge for 70 years. Christine wrapped her arms around herself. Or longer, she whispered. They decided they had to see it again, not to run, but to face it. On October 20th, just past midnight, the three of them returned. The air was colder than usual, the river beneath them roaring as if warning them away. Suddenly, the lamppost flickered, and the shadow appeared. Taller than before, darker, almost solid. Alison felt her legs weaken, but she forced herself to step forward. What do you want from us? She shouted. The figure tilted its head, and for the first time, a sound came. It was a voice, hollow and echoing, that seemed to seep from the air itself. To be remembered, the shadow stretched its hand toward Alison, and in that moment, she saw visions, flickers of people who had vanished. Clara Weston, the man from the newspaper, and countless others, their faces pale and eyes filled with terror, trapped in endless darkness. Alison screamed and stumbled back, but the shadow only grew stronger, as if her fear was feeding it. Dan grabbed her arm. We have to leave now. But Alison couldn't move. Her heart told her one thing. If they ran again, the shadow would never stop. Someone had to break the cycle. The shadow over the town. The moment Alison stood frozen before the shadow, the night itself seemed to hold its breath. The wind stopped. The rustling trees went silent, and even the rushing river below sounded distant, muffled, as if swallowed by the darkness surrounding the bridge. Dan was tugging at her arm with desperation. "Alison, please," he begged, his voice cracking. Christine's eyes were wide, shimmering with tears, but she, too, couldn't look away from the faceless figure. The shadow lowered its hand slightly, as though recognizing her hesitation. Its form wavered like smoke, yet its presence felt crushing, heavy, almost suffocating. Then came the whisper, not one voice, but many, overlapping, broken, as if hundreds of lost souls were speaking at once. "Remember us, remember us." Allison's knees buckled. She fell, clutching her head, as flashes tore through her mind. The faces of the missing, their final moments replaying in sickening fragments. A woman screaming as cold hands pulled her into the dark. A man struggling on the bridge, his eyes full of horror before being swallowed by the shadow. A child cry cut off mid-breath. When Allison's eyes snapped open again, she was gasping. The figure stood, towering over her, but this time its shape was clearer. The outline of a man in ragged clothes, his features blurred by endless suffering. Christine finally found her voice, trembling but loud. "Why us? Why now?" The shadow slowly turned toward her. The lamppost above flickered again, and in that split second, Allison thought she saw a face within the blackness. Hollow eyes, lips moving as though trying to form words. And then it came, clearer than before. "You see me. Others do not." Dan swore under his breath and stepped forward. "Then take me instead. Just leave them alone." The shadow shifted, almost amused, almost human. It leaned closer to Dan, and Allison could feel the freezing air swirling around them. But then, something strange happened. The figure stopped, as though blocked by an invisible barrier. Its faceless head turned sharply back to Allison. It wanted her. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest. She understood now. She wasn't just seeing the shadow. It had chosen her. For what? She didn't yet know. Summoning all the strength she had left, Allison shouted over the roar of the river and the screams echoing in her mind. "Tell me how to stop this. Tell me what you want from me." The bridge shook, the ground vibrating under their feet. The figure's body rippled like black water, and then its voice filled the air, so loud and piercing it felt as though the world itself was screaming. "Bring me back, or join them." The lamppost above shattered, plunging the bridge into total darkness. The shadow over the town. The bridge lay in pitch darkness, broken glass from the street lamp crunching under their feet. The only sound was the angry river below, its current twisting like a beast in the night. Allison could barely breathe. The last words of the shadow echoed in her mind like a curse. "Bring me back, or join them." Dan lit his phone's flashlight, the weak beam slicing through the darkness. The shadow was gone, dissolved into the air, but the heaviness remained. It felt like unseen eyes were still watching. "We can't come back here," Christine whispered, her teeth chattering. "We shouldn't even be here now. This thing, it doesn't just want to scare us. It wants—" She trailed off, unable to finish. Allison stood silently, her hands shaking, but inside her a terrible clarity began to form. "It wants to live again," she murmured. "It wants someone to bring it back." Dan shook his head violently. "Don't even think about it. Whatever that thing is, it's not human anymore. We're not going to help it. We're going to find a way to destroy it." But Allison wasn't so sure. The next day, she returned alone to the library. She pored over old records, town archives, and journals. Page after page of yellowed paper spoke of disappearances, of screams near the bridge, of people who vanished without a trace. But finally, buried deep in a collection of handwritten testimonies from the 1800s, she found something different. A name, Elias Crow, a preacher who had lived in Riverston centuries ago, known for his dark charisma and strange midnight gatherings by the river. Locals had whispered that he tried to open a doorway to speak with the dead. When a terrible storm struck, he was swept into the river and declared drowned. But after his death, townsfolk began to vanish, one every October, always near the bridge. Allison's pulse quickened. Could the shadow be Elias Crow? Was he demanding to be brought back from the beyond? That night, she dreamed again. She was standing on the bridge, But this time the water below wasn't a river. It was black, endless like liquid shadows. And out of it, hands reached, dozens of them clawing upward, their voices pleading, "Bring him back, free us." Among the hands, Alison saw a face, pale, drenched, eyes wild with fury, Elias Crow. He stretched his arm toward her, the same faceless shadow from before flickering over his body like smoke. She woke up screaming. At dawn, Alison told Dan and Christine what she'd learned. Dan slammed his fist against the table. "So that's it? This thing is some dead preacher, and now it's trying to claw its way back?" "No, we end it. Whatever it takes." Christine, pale and shaken, whispered, "But what if it's true? What if the only way to stop the curse is to bring him back?" Alison's throat tightened. She didn't want to believe it, but she knew the truth. Either they would fulfill Elias Crow's demand, or the disappearances would continue. And now, she feared the next victim would be her. The shadow over the town. The sun set early that evening, drowning Riverston in an uneasy twilight. Alison sat at her desk, staring at the collection of old documents spread before her. Elias Crow's name seemed to leap off every page, his story more sinister with each line she read. He hadn't just been a preacher. He had been obsessed with death, obsessed with finding a way to defeat it. Witnesses wrote of his sermons in which he promised his followers eternal life. But the townsfolk whispered of something darker. Rituals at midnight, blood spilled on the stones of the riverbank, strange chants that made the air vibrate. When the storm came and swept him away, many said it wasn't an accident. They said the river claimed him, refusing to let him unleash what he had begun. But what if the river had only imprisoned him, not destroyed him? Alison rubbed her temples. The shadow hadn't lied. She could see him when others couldn't. He had chosen her. That night, she gathered Dan and Christine in her room. The lamp cast shaky circles of light across their faces. Dan's jaw was set, his voice sharp. "We don't summon him, Alison. We burn whatever's left of him. We find the place he preached, dig it up, and destroy it." Christine bit her lip. "And what if that makes it worse? What if that's what he wants, for us to fight him, so he could drag us down too?" Alison felt the weight of both their fears pressing on her. "I don't know what's right," she admitted, "but I do know this. If we do nothing, more people will vanish. The missing ones, they're trapped. I saw them in my dreams. They're begging to be freed, and he's holding them." Christine shivered. "So either we bring him back, or we find a way to lock him away forever." They decided to search Elias Crow's last known place of worship, the ruined chapel on the far edge of town. Half buried in vines and forgotten by time, it was said to be cursed. People avoided it, claiming they heard voices when the wind blew through its broken windows. When the three of them arrived, the night was moonless. Their flashlights swept over crumbling walls, pews covered in dust, and a pulpit blackened with age. The air smelled of mildew and something metallic like rust or blood. In the center of the chapel lay a stone altar, cracked but still standing. Strange markings were carved into it. Spirals, symbols, letters in a language none of them recognized. Alison traced her fingers over the grooves, and for a moment, her vision blurred. The room darkened, shadows crawling up the walls like living things. She gasped as an image burned in her mind. Elias Crow, standing right where she was, chanting in a low, guttural tone. Around him, people knelt, their eyes blank, as if his words had stolen their souls. Then lightning struck, the roof caved in, and everything went black. Alison stumbled back, trembling. "This is where it began," she whispered. "And this is where it wants to begin again." Dan gripped a rusted metal rod like a weapon. "Then we destroy it. Now, before he gets stronger." But before Alison could answer, the temperature dropped. Their breath came out in white clouds. And from the shadows of the ruined chapel, a voice rose, deep, echoing, both everywhere and nowhere at once. Too late. The flashlights flickered. The altar pulsed with a faint glow, as if something beneath it was alive, breathing. Christine screamed as a black hand, long and skeletal, pushed up from a crack in the stone. Alison's heart pounded. She realized with a sick certainty, Elias Crow wasn't waiting to be summoned. He was already clawing his way back. The shadow over the town. The ruined chapel shook as dust rained down from its crumbling beams. The altar split further, jagged cracks spreading across the stone like veins. That black hand, skeletal, dripping shadow like ink, clawed its way upward, gripping the edge of the altar with unnatural strength. Christine screamed and stumbled backward, dropping her flashlight. Its beam rolled across the floor, cutting through the gloom just enough to reveal the arm attached to that hand. Thin, stretched, more smoke than flesh, but undeniably human in shape. Dan raised a metal rod he had brought, his knuckles white. "Stay behind me," he shouted, but his voice cracked. His bravado was slipping. Alison couldn't move. She was frozen, her eyes locked on the altar as another hand burst through, fingers scraping the stone, nails screeching like knives on glass. The voice came again, filling the chapel with vibrations that rattled the broken windows. "Bring me back." Alison felt it deep in her bones, a command, a demand that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to her soul. The shadows in the corners of the chapel grew thicker, darker, and faces appeared within them. Pale, screaming, twisted in agony. The lost souls. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Their mouths opened in silent cries, their hands reaching, but they weren't reaching for help. They were reaching toward Elias Crow, as if bound to him. "Alison, we need to get out of here," Christine cried, grabbing her arm. But Alison didn't move. Her heart pounded, and her breath came fast. Somewhere in her mind, a thought whispered. Not her own, but planted there by the shadow. "You are the key. Only you can free me." She dropped to her knees, pressing her hands to her ears as if that could shut it out. "Why me?" she whispered through clenched teeth. "Why me?" Dan swung the rod down hard against the altar. Sparks flew as metal clashed with stone. The sound echoed like a gunshot, but instead of breaking, the altar flared with blinding light. Dan was thrown back across the room, slamming into a rotted pew. He groaned, struggling to breathe. "Dan!" Christine screamed, rushing to his side. The second hand of Elias pulled further out. A shoulder, then part of a face, blurry, faceless yet forming like clay still being shaped. His body was made of shadow and smoke, but his presence was suffocating, monstrous. Alison staggered to her feet, her voice breaking. "Stop, please." The shadow's head tilted toward her, eyeless but fixed directly on her. For the briefest moment, the face flickered, and she saw him. Elias Crow. Sunken eyes, mouth twisted into something between a grin and a snarl. "You call me." Alison's blood ran cold. "I didn't." "You saw me," the voice thundered. "And now you belong to me." The walls of the chapel shuddered. The pews toppled over. Glass shattered from the empty window frames, spraying the air with jagged shards. Christine screamed again, pulling Dan toward the exit, but the doors slammed shut with a deafening boom. They were trapped. Elias pulled himself higher from the altar, his torso now visible, his form growing more solid with every second. The shadows of the chapel bent toward him, feeding him, pouring into his body. Alison's mind raced. The visions from her dreams, the cries of the souls, the endless cycle of disappearances, it all connected. He wasn't just demanding resurrection. He was feeding on fear, on memory, on being seen. Every time someone vanished, it gave him more strength. And now he wanted her. She stepped forward despite her shaking legs, her voice barely a whisper, but firm. "If I'm the key, then I'll decide what happens next." Elias froze for a moment, as if intrigued. The faceless form leaned closer, smoke curling from its half-formed body. "Then choose," he hissed. "Bring me back, or burn with me." The altar pulsed again, a sick heartbeat that shook the ground. Alison realized this was it, the moment that would decide everything. Behind her, Christine cried out, "Don't listen to him. We can find another way." Dan, bloodied but still clutching the metal rod, shouted hoarsely, "Alison, if you give him what he wants, he'll destroy everything." The chapel trembled violently. Dust rained down, and Elias Crow began to rise fully, stretching his long arms toward her. Alison clenched her fists, her breath ragged, and whispered to herself, "It ends tonight." The shadow over the town. The ruined chapel roared with sound. The cracking of stone, the groaning of beams, the shrieking of the trapped souls in the shadows. Elias Crow was almost free now, his body towering, half smoke, half flesh, a nightmare stitched together by darkness itself. Alison's pulse hammered in her ears. She felt small, fragile, like a child facing a hurricane. But deep inside her, something else stirred, a stubborn fire that refused to be extinguished. She wasn't just a frightened girl anymore. She had been chosen, yes, but choice went both ways. Elias reached for her, his voice filling the chapel like thunder. "Bring me back, child of light. Open the door. Free me." His words slithered into her mind, tempting, commanding. She saw visions again. The faces of the missing, trapped in shadow. They stretched their arms toward her, pleading, desperate. Her heart ached. If she refused, would they remain damned forever? Christine clutched Dan's arm, sobbing. "He's lying. They're not asking her for help. He's using them." Dan, blood still dripping from his forehead, pushed himself forward with the rod in his hand. "Alison, whatever happens, don't give him what he wants. He's not human anymore. He never was." Elias let out a laugh, low, cruel, echoing with centuries of rage. "Fools, you think you can defy me? I was the chosen of God, the shepherd of Riverston. These people follow me willingly. They wanted eternity, and I gave it to them." His voice cracked the air like lightning. The floor split in places, revealing glimpses of black water beneath, writhing like liquid shadow. Alison clenched her fists, stepping closer despite the tremor in her legs. If you were a shepherd, then why do they scream in pain? Why do they beg to be freed? For a moment, Elias's form wavered. His hollow eyes burned into hers. Then his mouth twisted into a grin. Because eternity always has a price. He lunged. The ground shook as his massive form surged forward, shadow arms stretching toward her like whips of smoke. Alison dove to the side, barely missing his grasp. The cold of his power grazed her skin, sending a stabbing chill deep into her bones. Dan swung the rod with every ounce of strength left in him, striking Elias across the chest. It passed through like air, but for a moment the shadow faltered, its body rippling. Elias snarled, backhanding Dan across the chapel. He hit the ground hard, unmoving. "Damn!" Christine shrieked, rushing to him. Alison's breath caught. Rage ignited in her chest. She turned back to Elias, who towered over her, smoke swirling around his form like a storm. "You think you own me," she said, her voice shaking but rising. "But I don't belong to you." The shadow paused, almost curious. Alison pressed her palm against the cracked altar. The carvings glowed faintly under her touch. In that instant, a memory from her visions returned. Elias's followers kneeling, their souls bound not by chains but by his words, his ritual carved into this very stone. The altar wasn't just his prison, it was also the source of his power. Her voice rang out, strong despite her fear. If this is where it began, this is where it ends. She dug her nails into the carvings and began to trace them, her voice rising in instinctive defiance, repeating the words she had heard in her dream. By blood, by name, by shadow undone. Elias roared, his form trembling violently. The chapel walls bent inward as if the whole building would collapse. "Silence!" he thundered, lashing out with a wave of shadow. Alison was thrown back, slamming against the pews, but she forced herself up again, blood trickling from her lip. Christine screamed over the chaos. "Alison, whatever you're doing, keep going." Alison staggered back to the altar, pressing both hands against it now. She shouted louder, her voice colliding with Elias's thunderous rage. "By river's claim, by soul's release, I banish thee." The carvings blazed with light. The souls in the shadows wailed, their cries shaking the chapel to its foundations. But their screams weren't of pain now. They were of hope. Elias's body split apart, shadows tearing away like smoke in a gale. He bellowed, his voice filled with fury and desperation. No, you cannot. You are mine. But Alison screamed back, summoning every ounce of strength, every drop of defiance. I am not yours. The altar exploded in light. Elias Crow shrieked as his form unraveled, his arms clawing at the air, his face twisting in rage and terror. The shadows were ripped from him, dissolving into the light. The trapped souls shot upward, their voices rising in one final, deafening cry. Then silence. The chapel went still. Alison collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving. The air was heavy with dust and smoke, but the crushing presence was gone. Elias Crow was gone. For the first time in decades, Riverston Bridge was silent. Truly silent. The shadow over the town. The chapel lay in ruins. Broken beams groaned under the weight of centuries. Dust floated thick in the air, and shards of the shattered altar still glowed faintly with dying light. Alison knelt on the cold stone floor, her body trembling, her hands raw from pressing against the carvings. She could hardly believe it was over. Christine rushed to Dan, who still lay sprawled near the pews. Dan, wake up! Her voice cracked with fear. She shook him gently, and after a long, dreadful moment, his eyes fluttered open. He coughed, groaned, and tried to sit up. You did it, he rasped, looking toward Alison. Tell me you did. Alison swallowed hard, her throat dry. I did. For a few heartbeats, there was silence. No whispering shadows. No echoing voices. Just the distant hum of the night outside. Alison let out a shuddering breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to peace. But peace never lasts in Riverston. They left the chapel before dawn, limping, exhausted, but alive. The cold night air felt strange, thin, almost fragile, as though the world itself had been cracked open and stitched back together. The three of them walked in silence down the dirt path, not daring to speak, not daring to believe they were safe. When they finally reached the bridge, Alison stopped. The river flowed beneath them, calm and quiet, reflecting the faint glow of morning. She gripped the railing, staring down into the water. For years, for decades, for centuries, this place had been a hunting ground for Elias Crow. But now the air felt lighter. Dan placed a hand on her shoulder. He's gone, Alison. You ended it. Christine nodded quickly, though her eyes darted nervously toward the river. We're free now. Everyone is free. Alison wanted to believe it. She really did. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. A ripple. The water below the bridge twisted strangely, as if stirred by an unseen hand. She blinked, and it was gone. But her stomach clenched. Dan followed her gaze. What is it? Nothing. Alison lied quickly. It's nothing. That day, Riverston buzzed with talk. The police investigated the collapse of the old chapel, calling it a structural failure. The newspapers ran stories, but the truth of what had happened was known only to Alison, Dan, and Christine. At night, Alison tried to sleep, but dreams came again. Not the suffocating nightmares of Elias's shadow, but softer, sadder dreams. She saw the faces of the lost souls, now free, drifting upward into a sky full of stars. They looked at her, some smiling, some crying, but all whispering the same word. Thank you. She woke with tears on her face. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, she couldn't shake a gnawing unease. In crowded streets, she sometimes felt a chill pass over her skin, as though someone invisible brushed against her. At the café, when she worked late, she caught herself glancing at the door, half expecting a faceless figure to slip inside. One evening, walking home alone, Alison crossed the bridge again. The air was cool, the street lamps glowing steady. She paused in the middle, staring down at the river. For a moment, everything was peaceful. Then she heard it. A whisper, so faint she almost thought she imagined it, curling around her like smoke. You're not done. Her blood turned to ice. She spun around. No one was there. The bridge was empty. The town beyond was quiet. But when she looked back at the water, her heart nearly stopped. Beneath the surface, Just for an instant, she saw them. A pair of eyes, pale and furious, staring up at her from the depths. And then the river rippled, erasing them. Alison staggered back, gripping the railing. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. The curse of Elias Crow was not gone. It had only begun. The shadow over the town.